All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I'm your host, Dr. D. Thanks again for joining us this week. We are talking about the Roadmap to Resilience, Part 3, your Trifecta of Preparedness Plans. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. All right, thanks again, and I really hope you're enjoying the first two parts of this series. First part talking about the world and understanding the world around us, and the second part understanding who is responsible for that world around us. And now we turn to your trifecta of preparedness plans, the actual application of theory. We call it the operationalization of academic theory, and it means all of this research that we've talked about repeatedly throughout all of the episodes means something. But how do we practically turn that into actionable steps that individuals can take? So if we argue that evidence-based preparedness is how you win the day, and I give the evidence and research shows that communities who do X have better post-event outcomes, then if I don't operationalize that and tell you how to do X, based upon that research and the evidence as we understand it, then we're really not doing anything. And far too often, this discipline and many other fields have a lot of academics and a lot of well-intentioned gray literature folks in governments and corporations and think tanks just producing all of this material and saying, look how smart we are. We're just telling you what to do. If society would just listen to us. But a lot of the times, those generalizable theories, which then are applicable to everybody, don't contain the specific steps that somebody can action. When somebody says grow a sense of belonging in your community, from a theoretical perspective, we know that to be true, and we know that leads to better post-event outcomes. The question is, how the heck do you do that in your neighborhood, right? I grew up in the neighborhood of Clayton Park in Halifax, Nova Scotia. How do I do that in Clayton Park? What steps? What's the first thing I do? Who do I talk to? How do I talk to them? What do I say to them? Those are the practical applications that have been long missing in the preparedness space, right? People just tell you the theory for Preparedness Week is be prepared, know your risks. That's great. What the heck does that mean? How do I do it? What are the exacting and specific steps that I need to follow so that I understand my risks? And now that I understand my risks, what's the value of understanding my risk around me if I have no idea how to mitigate it, right? I know I'm going to burn alive in an inferno. That's great. If you don't tell me what to do about it, now I'm just going to go to bed understanding this massive risk that hangs over my head. So what we've tried to do with the knowledge is translate it into operationalization. Now, we have to start at the top level. When we think about the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, or DRR, it is an organization that has done some amazing, wonderful research towards how do we bring the great minds of the world together to talk about reducing risk. Risk specific to disasters, natural disasters, mainly is their theory, or climate-induced emergencies. How do we reduce the threat from those? How do we reduce the risk from those in a community? For example, if you're in a community that is subject to repetitive and regular flooding or potential large-scale flooding, what can that do? And so this work is very valuable at the national and the subnational level because it brings together a lot of organizations. But the difference where it loses its applicability is when you bring it to the micro level at the municipal, local, community level. The rationale is that the disaster risk reduction is hazard specific, which means it talks about flood, earthquake risk, or this type of risk. And what we know to be true in the research that we've done with individuals and community groups is that when we tell people they have a risk profile that is exposing them to 10 or 15 different hazards that may or may not be realized, as we say in the nomenclature, it actually happens. So an earthquake is a hazard that is realized. Before it's realized, it's just a threat. And so if I was to say to you, there's 12 or 15 major threats to you right now, and I'm going to ask you and give you information about how you prepare for each. How do you ready your family to navigate 12 to 15 different potential disasters? The theory behind our research shows that leads to apathy and avoidance very quickly. Very few people will embark on that kind of difficult journey in preparedness planning. They will simply look at the level of work required and the level of detail that there would have to be accumulated and the level of information that would have to be digested as simply too big of an obstacle to overcome. So they will simply avoid it, or they will look for apathetic, saying, well, if it happens to me, there's nothing I can do about it, but it probably won't happen to me, so I'm not worried about it. So disaster risk reduction works really well at the subnational and national level. Now, there's a new emerging theory that talks about disaster impact reduction, and this is DIR. And what it gets to is the at the coalface, dealing with actual things that happen to real people and strategies to deal with it. And the difference is, in a very simple way to describe disaster impact reduction, is we don't care why the power's off. We just want to make sure that people are prepared to navigate a situation while the power is off. It doesn't matter which one of those 12 or 15 hazards that were realized that has subsequently now caused the hazard, the power to go out. We're not concerned with the why. We're concerned at what now. And so when we face the practical application of what can happen to a human being, a family, a community, or a neighborhood, or a business in the daily run of their operations, we think about that first discussion we had in part one about critical infrastructure, right? So DIR ties right into critical infrastructure. When you look at your world and you ask yourself, what does my world look like when I lose access to the power grid? For whatever reason, we don't care. That's disaster impact reduction. And we have understood that when we present it in a practical scenario to individuals, they don't conceptualize an earthquake and what that would look like, but they do understand what a power outage looks like. And they're very much open to having the discussion and be receptive to ideas and suggestions about potentially some improved behavioral adaptation that may lessen the impact of a power outage and improve their ability to navigate through it. So we've moved from DRR to DIR. And why is that important? So when we look at what a human has an option to do, if you think of where you live, if you think of what you do for a living, your family, your community, your neighborhood, and your entire life, when a significant disruption happens, and I mean something significant, you essentially have a binary choice. You can shelter in place at home, wherever that residence may be, or you can evacuate. The human body, in general, there is no other choice. And so when we examine your binary choices, we say, okay, the individual can shelter in place. So what does that mean? So shelter in place, when we look at the historical data that we have on the last 30, 35 years of North American research, and, there's about a dozen good years of research out of Australia and New Zealand. When we look at the shelter in place ideology or culture surrounding that, it's kind of culturally, we talk about it as the, bugging in scenario in the North American parlance, right? People talk about bugging in a disaster, which means hunkering down in your home. There's lots of phraseology. You can use whatever colloquialism you want. But it essentially means that in times of significant disruptions, we know that people will return home if they can, because home is a confident, safe place. It's where their stuff is. It's where the people they love, the people they count on are. And so people will, by nature, return to their home. It's an animalistic thing that humans have as being an animal, is in times of disaster, we collectively gather. And we do that with our bonded social groups first, which is our family. So we know that humans have a natural propensity to gather in times of disaster with those they're responsible for and those that they love. So people do naturally return to the home in times of disaster. If the home is deemed safe and is not as under immediate threat, then you're going to shelter in place. And so that generally means, from a high perspective picture, and we'll drill into each one of these shortly, but you're going to provide, but to shelter in place, you need to be able to provide the animalistic requirements of food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security for a timeline that you deem appropriate for your family as you define it and for those whom you'll be responsible for. It's really in a simplistic format as that. So we'll break it into the three pieces. The first part is your family and how you would define that. Now, in a modern sense, the Cleaver's nuclear family is largely not the most prominent. We have mixed, we have blended families, we have separated, divorced families, but you also have to consider we have multi-generational families. It's in some cultures, it's very important to have the elderly live in their final years with other family members. It may be common to have several different families living, family units living under one house in some cultures. As well, you might have multi-location, which means your family is a really tight group social contact, but it's actually living in 3 or 4 different houses in the same region. Or you may have an elderly member of the family living at a care home close by for whom you're going to be responsible. For the first step that we always suggest is that understanding who your family is. And you're going to say, oh yeah, I know my family. Well, we ask you to think a minute about that because there are people who are going to turn to you because of your leadership, your stalwart nature, or who you are in the family in times of emergency. They may not necessarily live with you, but they're going to be looking to you and may look to connect and be supported by you in significant disruptions. So take a bit of time to understand that. And don't forget the wee pets, because we love our pets and pets are important and need to be cared for. So you need to understand the family and for whom I'm responsible commentary that we make is very important because that frames for who you will have to provide the animalistic requirements. Now, when we think about animalistic requirements, I refer to that because it's a node to the idea that humans are animals in the environment. We don't sit on top of the environment. And when you get down to the basic needs of the human animal, from the id principles, however you want to look at them, there are some basic ones and there's some advanced ones. And so when we capture these together in a disaster scenario, we refer to them as your animalistic things because we're not worried about cell phone access or internet access or things like that. We're worried about the basic survival to keep people going and then your ability to keep life as close to pre-event normalcy as possible, right? Now, your shelter is simple. There's a gray-bearded Green Beret, which is a wonderful retired U.S. Army individual who's got a fabulous business online. Go check him out, the gray-bearded Green Beret. And I quote him every time because he's the one who told us, shelter is a layered system. And the first, something to sleep on, something to sleep under, and something to sleep in. So it basically means that your clothing is your first line of defense. You have bedding and a house. So basically your shelter needs to be able to protect you from the elements. Full stop. That's it. It can be an apartment on the 32nd floor of a condo building. Good luck with the stairs. Or it could be a mansion in the burbs or anywhere in between. It basically has to be able to protect you from the elements. You have to be able to climate control. So whether it's extreme heat or extreme cold, you need to have the ability to manage and change the temperature to the greatest extent possible. You have to be able to keep people safe, basically thermal regulation of internal core temperature. And so it's not that complex when you think about shelter. It's just basic shelter from a humanistic perspective is basically your home. And it works because your home you live in now. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Your home is fine. Food, we want you to think about food and water as a system. When you think about food and water, think about the fact that when you're sheltering in place, you're going to want to be able to do that without access to utilities. So power, gas, hydro, that kind of thing. Maybe they're available, maybe some is available, maybe some is not. But if you think through your strategy of how you're going to shelter in place and provide food and water to the people for whom you're responsible, think about it as a system of, I need to acquire the food, I need to store the food, I need to prepare the food, I need to dispose of the leftovers, I need to wash the utensils. All of the things is a system, right? So it's no different. You cook food for your family right now. We're not reinventing the wheel. Just ask yourself, what does this look like when I can't use my stove? What does this look like when I can't use my refrigerator? That's the systemic changes that happen. When I withdraw access to utilities, you have dishes in your home, but do you have the ability to clean them without the dishwasher? And just these little things, and when you think it through as a system and you logically walk through what that does, if you have to boil water because of potable water advisory due to a problem with the water treatment plant, and so you have to boil water, how do you do that in your house when you don't have a stove, right? How do you purify water if you can't boil it? What other methodologies are available? So can you provide edible food and good food? Because let me tell you, there's nothing faster in a mutiny, whether you're in the army as I did for 28 years, or whether you're in my household. If I can't provide a hot cup of tea with cream and sugar to my wife, I might as well just go out the front door and not come home, right? There are certain standards to make. So you think about that. And then when you think about health, safety, and security, you're thinking about, do you have the ability to provide basic first aid? Do you have the skills and training and the knowledge to be able to do that? Because a robust first aid kit that you buy offline is cool, but it's not much help to you if you don't have the first aid training. If you have the first aid training and skills, but not the equipment, you're still far better off because you can jury rig, and good training shows you how to jury rig and use other non-first aid equipment to support first aid activities. You have the ability to reduce injury. So within the home, there's a whole bunch of crowded stuff. People fall when there's no light. And then we think about access to information, right? Part of your health, safety, and security is knowing what's going on in the outside world, knowing what's happening around you. What are your trusted sources of information? Where are you going to get them from? What medium is going to come across? So if you're interested, and I think it's very important for you to be interested, where is your local government going to post the most recent information, what they're doing, what they're talking about, how they're restoring critical infrastructure? Where is that going to be? If you don't have internet access, it's not very good for them to put it up on their webpage if you don't have cell phone or internet access. So if it's going to come across the radio, what radio station are they going to use? How are you going to get trusted sources of information from outside? Remember, none of this about your animalistic requirements in a shelter in place is about creating 20 individual households within a neighborhood. It's about your social connections. We're going to talk more about this in step 5, but building social connection with your neighbors so you get together regularly, especially when there's no internet and TV to watch, to find out how are they doing, what's going on, how is the neighborhood, how's everybody holding up, what have you heard, this is what I have heard. And the sharing of information goes a great deal away. The second part is security. And this is simply put that is your home a safe place, and can you control access to the home? And it basically means you're not going to live in a place with marauding groups of angry people who are pillaging and plundering around the neighborhood because of the disaster. But is your home a safe place and a secure place where you can lock the door and you can prevent people from entering it whom you do not want to give permission to end? And we know from a sense of security is often heightened in disasters, but when you have strong social connections, again, we'll deal with this in a later step, when you understand and you have strong social connections in your neighborhood and you have a sense of belonging and you have been there for a reasonable period of time, you understand something called pattern of life. And this simply means what is the normal things that you see in your neighborhood. So when a person or an activity is out of sorts, it will actually trigger. You will pick that out of a crowd and go, hold on a second. That person is not normally around here. Doesn't mean they're malicious. It's just they're new. And that activity is something new and something we don't normally see around here. So it creates interest. And so the idea of providing your animalistic requirements to those for whom you're responsible is just understanding how to system. How would you conduct your regular normal life in a disaster if you didn't have access to utilities? It's really that simple, right? It's not about buying equipment. There's absolutely nothing you're going to have to acquire. The point is simply, maybe you'll learn how to build a fire in your backyard to boil water. But the point being is, you are just going to figure out as a system, how do I do the things that I normally do when I don't have power or gas, etc.? And so the next thing that we think about is timeline. And so you understand who your family are, you understand their specific needs and interests and their animalistic requirements, but now we think about timeline. So the standard government messaging is 3 days, 72-hour kits. We've all heard those things. And the idea being is the government believes in general that after 72 hours, they will be in a position to close that preparedness gap. If you remember, the preparedness gap that we talked about in step 1 was that difference between your disaster-induced needs and what the society currently provides. And there's a gap. So nobody can give you the need that you have in the first 72 hours. After that, the government tends to assert their ability to fill that preparedness gap after 72 hours. Now, we recommend 14 days. The reason we recommend 14 days here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated and our podcast Inside My Canoe Head is we conducted a study in 2022, in 23 to 24, where we looked at a significant number of critical infrastructure recovery timelines. So we examined when a disaster happened, how long did it take the different sectors of critical infrastructure to come back online, right? Because if we get back to the assertion we made at the very beginning of step 1, is that emergencies and disasters are related to loss of access to critical infrastructure, and it goes down, what does the research and data tell us about the recovery timeline for critical infrastructure? Generally speaking, 94% of critical infrastructure sectors in North America, the only data that we looked at, are back up online within 14 days of loss of service, right? So if you bet on 14 days, you're going to be right 94% of the time. The other 6% was solely due to specific sectors where there was a total catastrophic loss. For example, or tornado took out the water treatment plant, or a fire burned down the only grocery store in your town, right? Those are very, very specific instances where it's going to take a much longer timeline. It's not that the CI is not going to recover. It's just it's going to take much longer timeline due to a direct catastrophic loss. Other than that, we recommend that based upon the data, not some number we pull out of the sky, but as I've said in the beginning and throughout this roadmap to resilience, is it's all about the data that I can back up. It's all about the data I have that informs me that 14 days is accurate 94% of the time, right? I don't have data for 100%, and I don't think that data exists. But to skew it closer to 100%, you have to extend it outwards. Now, Part 5 that we're going to talk about later on this month and that we're going to release does talk about working your timeline beyond 14 days. So if you want to be prepared to be on your own for 30, 60, 90 days, whatever that may be, then there are things that we'll talk about and extend on there. And I've said clearly on this podcast, over 2 years, I extended my ability to be self-sufficient and reasonably self-reliant, because there's a difference in that terminology, for 90 days. And so that's my standard that I hold for myself and my family and our shelter-in-place plan. But that was several years to get there over a methodic plan. But if you want to go past 14 days, we have the information in Part 5. Now, we only recommend 14 days because that's accurate 94% of the time. And our research also shows us, and this is a secondary, but I think an important reason as well, is that the majority, but not all, but the significant majority of households we talk to already possess 14 days of food and equipment. So it's not, you don't have to buy anything. Like everything that we talk about in this podcast is not about sending you to the store to buy new stuff. The significant majority already have 14 days and could provide 14 days of nutrition to their family. So this is about looking at what you already have and thinking it through, not going to the store and buying, another pandemic supply of toilet paper. So if you look at the first of your binary choice, which is shelter in place, your family comes back to the home, everybody's there, the people you're responsible for, The utilities are down. The critical infrastructure is down. You've counted on 14 days. You have your animalistic requirements met. So you're going to try to provide as normal a possible life as you can. And there are a whole bunch of little things that you can do. And you can think through this as you walk through your preparedness plans of how close you can get that to normalcy with very little. There's ways to have solar power, for example, so that you can power your modem. So you have internet and cell coverage is outside your control, but you have internet coverage throughout. And then you can create Wi-Fi and you can do your cell phones through that kind of communication standard. So you can actually still have the whole thing. And I give a joke because some of this has real world practical application before we move on to the next step. I'm a hockey lover. Season ticket holder at the Ottawa Senators in the National Hockey League franchise. Huge fan of the NHL, huge fan of hockey. When the power goes out, I will not accept the fact that I lose access to the power. So I have a power backup system that allows me to hook my modem and my TV into it. So the community is blacked out and I'm watching live hockey. It matters. So you have your shelter in place plan figured out. You know what that's going to do. Your other binary choice is to evacuate. This is arguably, and research tells us, the most impactful and dangerous event that a family could go through is under very short or no notice having to abruptly leave the home where all their possessions, their lives, their sense of security, and evacuate it and not knowing whether the home will be there when they come back. So evacuations are exceptionally disruptive. They're difficult. So what does the research and what does the data inform? Is there a methodology to employ in evacuations so that your family, you yourself or your family, your neighborhood, your community is ready to evacuate if necessary and make it as less impactful as possible and reducing the in-crisis stress to the greatest degree that we possibly can? Because you can't get rid of the stress of an evacuation of a wildfire coming down the road and getting ready to burn your home. Can't do that, but what you can do is follow what research tells us works. Now, when you evacuate, you have three destinations. You have a pre-planned destination, you have a motel, or you have a community shelter. Community shelters are put up like rinks with 200 cots in there. It is not the place. There's no privacy. There's no sense of security. And that's not the place to compete with you and 200 friends for bathrooms, hand out food, and maybe some Wi-Fi to try to figure out what's going on in your life and start to restructure. Very disruptive, very dangerous in the sense of your mental health and your mental stability, and very difficult to move forward if your plan is to, by default, rely on a community shelter. The second one is a motel. It gives you a little bit more privacy, you and your family in your own separate location, but it is exceptionally costly. You have to have access to significant financial resources because economics are what they are, supply and demand. When there's an increased demand in the hotel, the rates will start to climb. I love my family, but do I want to be in a one-room hotel room with one bathroom with my entire family for a couple of weeks when we just lost our home? No, I don't, right? I love them to death, but I do not want that close. Right? Like, we will drive each other crazy, and on top of that, we'll be eating takeout meal at an exceptionally high rate of expense because most hotel rooms have nothing more than a microwave, and you can only microwave rice bowls, noodle bowls, and KD enough before peanut butter sandwiches become a delicacy, and then you want to string each other up. But the point is, neither one of those options are zero. They're not horrible, but they have significant difficulty in your ability to be calm, mentally safe, low cost, and start to rebuild your life. The third one, and the one that we recommend based upon research that tells us a less stressful, less anxious, and easier way to rebuild your life, is to have a pre-planned destination with friends or family, a place that you can go to, a basement of somebody's house that you can occupy for a couple of weeks in a significant disaster until you can figure out all of the things around it. It's a place that has a sense of security, a sense of safety. You'll be provided for food and water. You'll have access to local Wi-Fi and internet, which is going to be more powerful than the Wi-Fi you'll be competing for at the motel or the community shelter. and that you'll be around people who love and care for you and are there to support you through the event. Now, not everybody will have an immediate access to this. This is often something you have to work through. And I'll give a prime example that I've done on podcasts about this before. I live in Ottawa, Ontario. I have a friend of mine who lives north of Kingston, Ontario, and we have a reciprocal agreement that his family has access to my basement unquestioned at any time of the year, and I have access to his basement unquestioned. Doesn't cost either one of us any money whatsoever. We know if we have to show up doing an immediate evacuation, I throw the gear in the car and we go and we head to his house. He throws his gear in his car and his family comes to my house, welcome with open arms, access to the internet, food, water, shelter. All of their animalistic requirements will be fully taken care of for them, and they will have a place to stay, calm, have a cry, worry about the next future, and get on with trying to rebuild their lives. How you do that and who you do that with is up to you. Build the social connections necessary. Find a way to do that. The second part is often comes up is, what do I take with me when I have to evacuate? Now, if I was to tell you to pack all of your priceless items and important items into the car, you're probably going to have about 3 garage fulls worth of stuff you're going to want to take with you. The practical application of what you can actually evacuate for home is pretty small. The exercise that we recommend people go through, and this is evidence-based again, we've done a study, and I was actually part of a CBC marketplace. If you're going to look at, I think it's season 51 or 52, season episode 1, I was there as a disaster expert when we put families through a no-notice evacuation to see what they would gather, what they would get together, and what they would bring with them. And then I was there to give commentary, etc., on how they performed and score them for the CBC network. So we've been part of these experiments. We've done our own experiments before. And what has resonated throughout is that families who have a predetermined list of what they will take with them, and that list is printed and in a place where people know, they are far more successful. Now, successful meaning that they grab the things they want and they don't miss something. In the times of high crisis, what you don't want to be doing is having to make decisions. What you want to be doing is executing a decision you made before. So if you pull out a piece of paper from a drawer and it says, here are the things I want to take and here's where they are in the house, and here are the people that are going to gather them, it's just a group of people grabbing the things that they already determined they would grab, that you already know fit into the car, and they take care of it, right? And then what happens is you studies often show that about 80% of the material is retrieved, about 20% is still forgotten, missed, skimmed over, missed, whatever may happen. But you have a much higher degree of grabbing what you actually want and what you have predetermined as valuable to you and place it in. So the strategy so far is simple for an evacuation, is to have a pre-planned destination like DIR. You don't care why you have to evacuate. It doesn't matter. You just know that you're going to this destination. And because you made the preconceived list, you know what you're bringing with you. And the last part is our biggest transfer of risk that we have in the world today, which is insurance. You have insurance. If you're a homeowner, you have insurance. If you have a mortgage, you have fire insurance that's mandatory. Even if you have no mortgage on your home, you'd be a fool not to have fire insurance. If you are a renter, of course, you're highly encouraged to have some form of content and liability insurance so that you're not responsible for doing something dumb and burning the building down, or when your apartment neighbor below you decides to burn the building down, that your contents are covered. When we did a study here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated last year in 24, we found that a very small minority of humans, or respondents, understood and had a strong knowledge level of what their insurance covers. Most of the time what happens with insurance is people will simply go out and bid. They'll go to a broker. They'll find the lowest cost house insurance that's meets the minimum standards that their mortgage company wants, and they'll buy it and they'll fire and forget. They don't know anything about the policy. And when they find out, the time they find out about the restrictions and the lack of coverage is after the house is burned down, right? It's unfortunate. It's true. And so many people who have made the decision to have insurance have an intimate knowledge. So the recommendation we give to you is when you make your insurance decision, make an informed one. And after you've bought it, become intimately aware of all of the exclusions, all of the inclusions. And something that's very important is what are your very specific set of duties and responsibilities when a loss occurs, right? Because in your insurance policy, there are things you must do when you lose access to, or your house burns down, or you have a loss or a car accident. There are things you must do, and it's in your insurance policy. And should you fail to do those things, you may find yourself in a difficult position. And then when you become intimately aware, you understand the exclusions that you've accepted, and now you can decide whether those remain appropriate or whether you'd like to make further changes to your insurance policy. But if you have a pre-planned destination to go to, you have a pre-listed things you want to take with you, and you're intimately aware of your insurance coverage, that has shown through research to reduce the stress levels significantly on the family. It reaches a higher degree of stability in post-event. And stability doesn't mean you bounce back better. Stability means as you move from the disaster zone into your friend's basement and you start calling your insurance company while you're sitting on a lazy boy, not on a plastic folding chair, covering one ear because the kids are crying next to you from family X that you've never seen before. When you're trying to do that, you come up with a far more logical and informed decision-making process when you can do it from a state of calm and less anxiety. Not zero. These things are not stress-free events, not at all. But this is a zero-cost force multiplier that allows you to be ready to go. Now, we've covered the two binary choices. We've covered your shelter in place and your evacuation. The really only two things that you can do in the face of a significant, right? Because disaster impact reduction, we don't care why the situation is what it is. You're either going to be able to stay in your home or you're not. That's really your choice. But why is there a trifecta of preparedness plans? Well, this came out of research that we did in 23 with looking at disaster victims and how they categorize disasters. And it came out at a significant number that people responded that the loss of income, the loss of the primary income, was just as worrisome to them, something that they were concerned about, as a house fire. So when we looked at the data, it kind of emerged, it's pretty close to equal, but never exactly equal, that people under normal conditions consider the loss of their job as impactful as the loss of their home. In today's global economic conditions, political conditions, economic conditions, we have far more people in precarious employment situations. We have governments that are quickly running out of money, or excessive government spending is causing inflationary measures. What we're in a situation is you can't automatically and by default count on a government assistance program, no matter what government you're in, to cover your uninsured costs when you lose your job. Now, obviously, you can buy job loss insurance. You can buy insurance for anything if you have the money. But if you don't have significant additional financial resources to buy job loss insurance, you can turn around and look and say, okay, and this is a phrase that my son said to me when I was in the Army. He goes, "Dad, everybody retires." And he was right. Everybody, the job you're in right now, you will lose it. You'll either die, you'll quit, you'll be fired, or you'll retire. Everybody leaves their current employment at some time. Now, we all hope that we get to leave that at a time and a place of our choosing. But current economic conditions probably should inform you that the likelihood is higher that you're going to get fired sometime ahead of when you actually want to. Understanding that means, what is your plan? What is your strategy? More than a plan, but what is your strategy to replace that income? It's not about a plan to try to not to get fired. It's about a strategy of how do you intend right now. If I was to say to you, You know your job. You know how you earn your income. You're fired tomorrow, right? And it could be something as simple as my brother got, he was an international businessman, vice president, really smart guy, cool guy, by the way, too. And he just get met in the lobby by security and HR and given his severance papers. You're gone. You may get fired due to a business shutdown. You could have a fire, and I use this example of one individual who was an auto body mechanic, auto mechanic, and his garage burnt down. The garage where he worked burnt down. He did nothing wrong. He was a great guy doing wonderful work at a healthy institution, just like tons of people in the pandemic, and the place he worked burned down. What does he do? What's his strategy? In very few circumstances, bosses cover your salary, but the majority of companies are simply going to lay you off when the company disappears or it burns down, right? What is your exact strategy to replace the income? Because government programs are not going to replace all of it. And unless you're really fortunate to have saved tens of thousands of dollars in a sneaky fund, you're going to need to fairly quickly replicate to the greatest degree possible the income you had before. Now, you're either going to take your profession and do it in a new industry. You're going to swing fire, as we would say in the Army, and start to learn, and you're going to commoditize a skill you have. For example, a good friend of mine was an engineer, but he's a really handy guy. Like, he's one of those handymen that can build a house on his own, right? He can do everything on his own. So his plan always was, if I get fired as an engineer, I can start up a company over here doing this type of work, right? So he had a strategy. The third part of this possible strategy is you're going to switch to a new career. Your intent is to switch over to something else, to do this, to earn an income here. And then you got to think about the timeline. How long is it going to take you to be up and running in that new industry, etc.? The whole measure of all of that tells you and informs you what your emergency fund should be. Now, there are lots of financial, and I'm not a financial planner, but there are lots of financial advisors who will tell you 3, 6, 12-month plans. I'm here to tell you that I logically believe, and this is opinion, this isn't data, but this is opinion, and I'll give it to you. I think that if you tie your emergency fund to the timeline to get your replacement income up and running, then it will make more logical sense to you than some magical figure somebody tells you 3 months is the right amount. So, for example, if you're going to switch over to become an electrician apprentice because you know there's a demand for electricians, that's your intent. You figure it's about 3 months for you to get up, to find a company, to get them degree, to bring you on as an apprentice. You've understood how much apprentices make. You've got this kind of figured out, and you figured about 3 months, right? So in logistics, we always do a safety stock, right? And a safety stock is always 1.5 times normal demand. So I would take that 3 months, multiply it by 1.5. I would have 4 months of basic living expenses saved away because I'm going to need that with a little bit of fudge factor when I become an electrical apprentice. Now think about if you get fired tomorrow and you have no plan, what do you pull out? The job wanted ads? You're going to jump on Indeed and see what's open? The person who thought through what they do next is going to be ahead of you. They're going to do better than you. They're going to succeed better than you are. This is what happened in the pandemic to a number of individuals who got fired for nothing other than a pandemic closed down their place of work. They swung fire, they pivoted to their alternate job, and within a week or two, or even 3 weeks, they were up and running and earning an income in their new job, some of them totally separate new industry, and not looking back. The vast majority of people just sat on their butts on a couch and waited for something magical to happen to return the world to normalcy. Everybody just assumed the world would turn back. You would get your job back. So you'd be rehired. All of this would go away and it'd be a bad day, right? And just look here in Canada, at least, at the number of families who had to go and needed government intervention to pay their bills for them. That is a dangerous thing because not that that was a bad thing, but that's counting on the government to do it. Now, imagine if we had another pandemic and the government chose to not provide any financial support to anybody, how would you do? Would you be able to navigate and support your family for 2 or 3 months if there was zero income coming in, right? Could you do it? That's a question. And if you couldn't, are you comfortable? And that's why we ask you to pivot. So the trifecta of preparedness plans is simply to set you up for success. If you're ready to shelter in place, if you're ready to evacuate, and if you're ready to take care of the situation when you get fired, that you are now insulated to some degree, depending on how far of an investment you make in it, to some degree against the most calamitous events that could happen to you. You are now going to be in an upper percentile and quintile of the population in the neighborhood around you. And when you do this collectively as a community and as a neighborhood and organizations and friends and family, multiple households get this way. And before you know it, the resiliency of the community moves forward. The idea of a trifecta of preparedness plans is just that. It is simple things that you can do that cost no money, but does require an investment of time and effort, that when you create these plans, you socialize them with your family, people understand them, and you're ready to go. Research shows that your steady state mental health improves because your anxiety about uncertainty, your anxiety about what might happen is significantly reduced because you have a strategy for deal with that for which you cannot control. And that does reduce your mental health anguish, does reduce the stress, and improves the health quality of life of people around you. And it has been shown that people with a higher degree of mental health and a stronger mental fortitude and emotional control have better post-event outcomes. The research is clear. So what we're trying to tell you is this third step in your roadmap to resilience is about amplifying the first two. The first one is about understanding the world around you. The second one is accepting responsibility for the world around you. And this is the operationalizing. Okay, so what? I've accepted responsibility. Now what do I do? Now you have a trifecta of preparedness plans. This is creating an incredible foundation, right? This is setting you and your family up for success. What we move on to next in step 4 is we start talking about understanding influences that are beyond your control. How do political, economic, cultural, ideological, and familial, and natural disasters impact how you operate your life? And then how do you look at risk assessment? In step 4, we're going to teach you how to build a risk profile for you and your family, something that you'll revisit on a reasonably regular basis, and something that will inform what risk that you're exposed to is of most concern. Because remember, you are going to be exposed to risk no matter who you are, and where you live and what you do. The question is understanding the risk and then finding those few points of risk that are of an extreme nature and are concerning to you, and that you address those and then periodically go back and reassess. And then you're going to be in a position where life is going to look a whole lot calmer and a whole more certain. Thank you very much for joining us this week and this episode at Inside My Canoe Head. Drop over to our website. Share it with as many people as you can. There's no ad revenue for me. The more shares does not make me more money. All this is about is sharing the best possible information we can about how to keep you and your family, your community, your neighborhoods, and your businesses as secure as possible in a chaotic and crisis-driven environment of which none of us have much control over. So thanks again, take care, and stay safe.